such a wonderful time with you this week. Thank you for coming to these night after night, and I really look forward to what we're going to be covering in the next couple hours. Take your handouts with me this evening, and I want to pick up with a story that took place in Luke chapter 13. It says on a, what does it say? Sabbath. On a Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the what? One of the synagogues. And a woman was there who had been crippled by a spirit for how long? 18 long years. Now, we learned, I think it was last Sunday night, maybe it was Monday, that the purpose for which Jesus came to this planet was to destroy the works of the devil. How many remember that from that night? And I repeatedly said that although the idea of a devil has been sorely abused by Christians, we cannot escape the fact that Jesus taught there was such a being. And to be a follower of Jesus, we can't escape the fact that he teaches his existence. It says that she was crippled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten up at all. When Jesus saw her, he called her forward and said to her, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." And it'd be lovely if that's where the story ended, but watch what happens. And he put his hand on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. The synagogue leader said to the people, "There are what? 6 days for what?
Work.
For work. So come and be healed on those days and not on the, what does it say?
Sabbath.
On the Sabbath." And the Lord answered him. You know, I just love Jesus in these moments. I don't have the sanctified motives to do this correctly the way I'm sure Jesus did. But Jesus looked and answered him and said, "You hypocrites. Doesn't each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or your donkey from a stall and you lead it out to give it water? Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for how long? 18 long years. Shouldn't she be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her? Will you treat livestock better than a daughter of Abraham?" When he said this, all his opponents were what? Whom humiliated. They didn't like it very much. But the people were, what's the emotion?
Delighted.
Delighted with all the wonderful things he was doing. I want to try to give you a little background to this story this afternoon. Go with me, if you will, to Exodus 16. This is right after the children of Israel have come out of Egypt. This is actually before they were given the Ten Commandments. This was right in their very early stages of being delivered from their slavery. They were traveling through the wilderness, and the Lord said to Moses, "I will" what? "Rain down bread from you" from where? From heaven. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In that day I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. Remember, these were slaves. They did not have the ability to govern themselves. They were still very, as far as thinking for themselves and doing for themselves, they had more of a slave mentality. It says, I'm going to test them and see if they'll follow my instructions. On the 6th day, they are to prepare what they bring in. And that's going to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. Now watch closely. In the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, there were thin flakes from the frost on the ground, and it appeared on the desert floor. The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some gathered little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Each one had gathered just as much as they what? Needed. Now I know sometimes when we're reading long passages, there's the temptation to kind of just glaze over. But stay engaged with me on this one, because it's going to become extremely meaningful. It says, "Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it until morning." So all of it was to be eaten when?
The same day.
Same day. Don't keep any of it. And this was actually a test of faith. Are you going to trust God to provide for you on a daily basis? That would be the equivalent of God telling you not to have a savings account. Do you understand what I'm saying? So this is a real serious test of faith. And it says, no one is to keep any of it till morning. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They had trouble trusting. And it says, so they kept part of it until morning. And what happened? It was full of maggots, and it began to what? So Moses was angry with them, and each morning everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it what? Melted away. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person. And the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses, and he said to them, this was his explanation. This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of, what does he say? Sabbath rest. It says a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you'll bake and boil what you want to boil, but whatever is left, keep it until when? Now, would this have worked any other day? No. But on Friday, keep it till morning, so that they stayed it until morning as Moses commanded, and it did not what? It didn't stink, nor did it get what in it? Maggots in it. It says, eat it today, Moses said, because today is a, what does it say? A Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be, what does it say? Any. Nevertheless, did they trust him last time? Did they trust him last time?
No.
So nevertheless, they don't trust him this time. It says some of the people went out on the 7th day to what?
Gather it.
To gather it, but they found how much?
None.
Interesting. So a day's worth would fall every day, except on Friday, how much would fall? Twice as much. And on the 7th day, how much would fall? None. And it says, then the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the what?
Sabbath.
That is why on the 6th day he gives you bread for
2 days.
Everyone is to stay there. They stay where they are on the 7th day. No one is to go out. So the people did what?
Rested.
Now, we have to ask our questions. What's he up to? What's he doing here? What's God doing with these slaves, these Israelites? And this is rooted and grounded in their Genesis narrative. The beginnings of this go all the way back to Genesis chapter 1. It says God saw how much? Talk to me. How much? Now listen, this is my 5th presentation today. I've already given 4 of them this morning and today for a group of young people at a school in town. So this is presentation number 5. I'm going to need your participation to stay awake. Are you with me? Will you help me tonight? Okay. It says God saw how much? All that he made. And it was what?
Very good.
It was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the 6th day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. And the 7th day God finished the work which he had been doing. So on the 7th day God what? Rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it what? Holy. Because on it he had rested from all his work which he had done. What I want you to notice first is this story with the manna. It was rooted and grounded in the historical reality of God's creation. That he had worked for 6 days but rested on the 7th. Now this is going to be significant to you in just a moment. Hang with me. One more piece of the puzzle you need is Exodus 20. It says this is the 10 Commandments now. This is after the manna experience. This is 4 chapters later, about a month later in time. God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. What does he say? You'll have no other what?
Gods.
Were there other gods in their understanding and in their cultures, in the Canaanite cultures.
Yes.
See, God was calling them to monotheism, but it was a very polytheistic culture. And these were slaves. Were they used to seeing other gods in Egypt?
Yes.
Did they know about other gods from Egypt?
Yes.
And did they struggle worshiping just Jehovah coming out of Egypt? Did they struggle with that?
Yes.
Yeah, how many remember when they made the golden calf? And how many know Israel's long history of going after other gods? See, all of these other gods, if you look at what was discovered, remember the Rosh Hashanah. How many remember me explaining that to you from 1929? All of these other gods had special and holy days too. And so God was calling them out of slavery, and He wanted them to worship Him, no other gods. And so He's going to give them a special day as well. And this day is significant that they are worshiping God as the Creator God. I'll show you what I mean by that. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven or above, heaven above, or in earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it what?
Holy.
Holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. Neither, what does it say? You, nor your what? Nor your what? Nor your, or female what? Now watch even this. Nor your what?
Animals.
Not even your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. Why? For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the what? Earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But He rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord did what? Blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Once again, they had options. They had a buffet of gods, so to speak, that they could pick from. Some of them went by the name of Baal, others Dagon, others Chemosh, Aster. You've all these other different gods that they could have picked from. They're going to now follow Jehovah, and what's going to be the significance for these other Canaanite cultures? The significance that they're following the Creator God. How are they going to be able to tell and show this? It's going to be through what? The Sabbath. In other words, it's going to be through a day that mimics the creation, that mimics the Creator God. You can find this, look in your grace section in Exodus 31:13. God says, say to the Israelites, you must observe my what? Talk to me. Sabbaths. This will be a sign between me and you for your generations to come, so that you may know that I am the Lord that makes you holy. I'm the one that makes you separate, that makes you different, that makes you special. And we're going to talk about that more in a moment. But Ezekiel 20 verse 12, look at what it says. I also gave them my what? Sabbath to be a sign between us, so that they would know that I am the Lord that made them what? Holy. In Exodus 20 verse 12, Ezekiel 20 verse 12. Keep my Sabbaths holy, that they may be a, what does that say?
Sign.
A sign between us. Then you will know that I am the Lord your what?
God.
This was a special sign given to the children of Israel coming out of slavery to distinguish them from the other Canaanites. Are you with me? Other Canaanites would worship other gods. They were going to be worshiping the Creator God. And one of the distinguishing revealers of that would be the day that they celebrated on. And I say celebrated because I want to also share with you what God meant in Exodus 20 by keeping the Sabbath holy. In Nehemiah 8, it talks about other holy days that Israel was given. And in Nehemiah 8, 9 through 12, follow with me. It says, then Nehemiah, who was the governor, and Ezra the priest and the scribe and the Levites who taught the people, said to all the people, this day is what? Holy to the Lord your God. Do not what?
Mourn.
Or what?
Weep.
That's like saying, dude, this is Thanksgiving. This is Christmas. We shouldn't be mourning and weeping on these days. Notice what it says. Then he said to the people, go, eat of the what?
Fat.
Drink of the what?
Sweet.
Eat of the fat, drink of the sweet, and send portions to him who has nothing prepared. Why? For this day is what?
Holy.
Now, I know it's very different for you, but where I come from, July 4th is a special day. You guys, I think, which day is it? Before or after?
July 1st.
July 1st. Okay, you guys celebrate July 1st. Those are course, for me, and I don't know your history, but for me, July 4th is especially significant because of the historical reality of what occurred on that day. On that day, it is special to Americans. How many would at least agree with that? It's special to us. Yeah. On that day, we set off fireworks. On that day, we eat apple pie. On that day, we cook dead carcasses on interesting cooking contraptions. We have picnics. We just live it up. We are eating the fat and we are drinking the sweet. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes.
See, this is what signified the Israelites were following the Creator God rather than those other gods. It says, he said, do not be grieved, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. So the Levites called all the people, saying, be still, for this day is what?
Holy.
Holy. Do not be what?
Grieved.
For all the people went away, and then all the people went away to what?
Eat.
And to what?
Drink.
To drink, and to send portions, and to, what does that say? Celebrate a great what? Festival, because they understood the words that had been made known to them. This is what I want you to take with you from this. Instead of seeing in the scriptures holy day, which can, because of religion, sound pretty abusive at times. A holy day is, you're not supposed to fast, you're supposed to do. No. What it originally was is the same thing in our modern vernacular that we call a holiday. After all, where did the term holiday come from?
Holy day.
Holy day. So that's what I want you to think. When you think of the Old Testament Jewish Sabbath, I want you to think of it as a holiday. Are you with me? Does that sound in harmony with what we've covered so far? If you can see that, say yes.
Yes.
It was a day when they weren't to work. They weren't to go to work that day. They were to spend the day eating the
Fat.
drinking the
Sweet.
and having a great celebration. Now, who do you think they were celebrating on this day?
God.
This happens to be the same day God rested on too. So they were celebrating this Creator God. And that was in contrast to Baal, Chemosh, and all these other gods that they could have been, Dagon, all these other gods that they could have been worshiping. Now, are we all on the same page so far? Everybody with me so far? Something happens from Nehemiah's day down to when Jesus shows up. By the time Jesus shows up, this isn't a holiday. By the time Jesus shows up, this is now once again a holy day. Do you understand the difference between those two terms? They didn't focus on celebrating, they focused on not working. I'm convinced that God's original intent for the Sabbath with the Hebrew people was not about calorie expenditure. It was about a redirection of calorie expenditure. In other words, instead of expending calories in working, gaining a living or working, or you spend those calories today now celebrating the Creator God. How many can see that? But see, by the time it came down to Jesus, it was, no, it's just about restricting your caloric expenditure. Don't work. They said you could only walk this far on the Sabbath. How many remember when Jesus healed the one guy on the Sabbath and he told him to take up his bed and walk? According to the Pharisees of his day, he had broken their Sabbath on 3 accounts. Not only had he healed on the Sabbath, which was working, he had told him to pick up his bed, which was carrying a burden, and he had told them to what? Pick up your bed and walk. Careful how many steps you take, because they had a thing called a Sabbath day's journey. And I'm sorry, if you'd already maxed out your steps for that day, you had to just have a seat until sundown. How many think that's foolish? Be honest, I think that's foolish. We do the same thing, though, as Christians with some of our religious rules, don't we? Don't we sometimes put people's needs below our religious rule? In other words, don't we put our religious rules sometimes above the needs of others? Don't we do that? Yep. We're well-meaning and we're well-intentioned, but we do it. Jesus came to turn the tide, to turn all of that around. And what's amazing to me is in every occurrence where you hear about the Sabbath in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, do you know what Jesus is doing every time?
Healing.
He's breaking their religious rules around the Sabbath, and he's trying to restore it to its original purpose for which he gave it to them. Remember the story with the disciples going down to the grain field, picking the grain and eating it? So innocent. But the Pharisees get upset and say, "What? Your disciples are harvesting grain on the Sabbath." What? That's crazy. And I'm glad that Jesus didn't look at them and say, "You're nuts." Instead, he tried to reason with him, and then finally he said, listen, if you would have understood, you would have condemned the innocent. That's not what this is to be about. So take with me again your second handout, and let's go back to Luke 13. It'll be at the top of your second handout as well. Maybe this will make sense. In Acts 1, verse 12, we find that they had a thing called a Sabbath day's journey. Look at Matthew 8, verse 16 over there in the gray section. When evening came, they brought to him many who were, what does it say? Demon-possessed. And he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were ill. Now there's a little detail in there. When did they do that? You'll miss this if you don't understand. When did they do it? When evening what? Came. Why did they wait till evening came? Because that's when the Sabbath ended. It was from sunset to sunset, even unto evening. When evening came, the Sabbath was over. And then they get... Can you imagine a religious system where God himself is on the planet wanting to heal people, but because of your religious rules, you have to wait until sundown to do that? How many can see the foolishness in that? I mean, they were criticizing him and condemning him and accusing him. And we'll see this in just a moment. Matthew 11, 28 through 30, Jesus said, come to me, all you who are what?
Weary.
And what? Burdened. And listen, if you have been wearied and burdened by modern Christianity, this message is just to you, just as much to you as it was to those who had been wearied and burdened by the abuses of the Phariseeism in his day. It says, come to me, all you who are weary, you who have been hurt, you who are burdened, you who have been abused, and I will give you what?
Rest.
How many are thankful that it's about following Jesus and not a religion? How many are thankful for that? I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, not some system's yoke. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your what? Souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is what? Light. Now think about it. What was the Sabbath all about? What does the word Sabbath mean? In Hebrew it means rest. Here they were, so vigilant about this Sabbath rest, and here was God coming to give them rest, and they missed it. How many think that's at least ironic? That's at least ironic. It goes on. Look at some of this. In John 19:30, therefore when Jesus had received sour wine, he said, it is what? Finished. He bowed his head and gave up his spirit. What many people don't realize is when this occurred, it was preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to what? To begin. Now watch this. Watch carefully. Matthew 28, after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. So on the sixth day, he's hanging on a cross, saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He's everything you know about the cross. And then he said, finally, it is finished. Now, this is wild. It is finished. And then he does what? He dies, and he's buried where? Talk to me. He's buried where? In a tomb. In a tomb. That's right. And notice, when the Sabbath is over, then what does he do?
Rise.
I would submit to you that even in the saving of this world, Jesus honored the Hebrew Sabbath. How many can see that? Died on Friday, rested on Sabbath, that seventh day, and then was resurrected on Sunday. How many can see that tonight? So he's even honoring that, because really, if the Sabbath was all about rest, isn't that what the cross really gives you, is rest? How many would see that they're supposed to be in harmony? How many can see that tonight? And yet they had the audacity, even in his death, he honors the true meaning of the Sabbath, but they had the audacity to say in John 19:16, therefore some of the Pharisees were saying, this man is not from God, because he does not what? What blindness. What spiritual blindness. And Jesus said in Luke 13, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those who sent you. How often I have longed to gather your children together, as hens gather her chicks under her wings. And you were not willing. Behold, your house is left unto you, what?
Desolate.
Desolate. I'm submitting to you that Jesus came to the Hebrew people and never wanted AD 70 to take place. How many understand what I mean by that? What happened in AD 70? Talk to me. Does anyone know the history? The destruction of Jerusalem. God wanted them to embrace what Jesus was teaching. And he wanted them to carry this new message to the entire world. He didn't want it to have to be done. His plan, let me just say it this way. Christianity is his plan B. Are you hearing what I'm saying? Plan A was that it would be done through who? And watch what he's doing. Why was the Sabbath significant back in the Old Testament originally? Because on the sixth day, what had God done with his creative work? Remember, he had finished it. Then what did he do on the seventh day?
Rest.
And was that enough of a historical event to give that day significance for the Hebrew people?
Yes.
Absolutely. Notice what he was doing on the cross. On the sixth day, once again, for the second time in human history, what does he cry out? It is finished. And what does he do on the seventh day again?
Rest.
Rested. And then he's resurrected on the first day, on Sunday. I think in the cross, he's repeating the very Genesis narrative we have in Genesis number 1 to give to the Hebrew people a new and even better meaning and significance to their Sabbath day. How many can see that? He's infusing it with even more significance than what Genesis gave it, than Genesis infused it with. But once again, did the Hebrew people buy into this? Did they buy into Jesus' message?
No.
No, he was actually giving the Sabbath greater meaning for them, but they accused him as being a Sabbath breaker. If you can see that tonight, say yes.
Yes.
They all ended up ultimately rejecting Jesus. The message went to the Gentiles, and even the Gentiles continue to reach back to the Jews during certain times, but the Jews would always persecute them. I'm not talking about Jewish Christians. I'm talking about the Jews who didn't believe in Jesus. Until finally, once again through an uprising against Rome, Rome finally had enough. And in AD 70, Jerusalem and the temple and that whole horrific history, Jerusalem was leveled. In the meantime, in the interim, when the gospel first started being proclaimed by the disciples, it started in Jerusalem. How many know that? It started in Jerusalem right there. And let's look at some of that. Acts 13, 14 and 42 through 46. If you're going to talk to the most amount of Jews on any given day, what day are you going to find them all in the same place?
Sabbath.
So it says, on the Sabbath day, they went into a what? Synagogue, and they sat down. And as Paul and Barnabas were going out, Paul and Barnabas were preaching, and when it was all said and done, as they were leaving the synagogue, as they were going out, the people began to what? To beg that these things might be spoken to them the next what? Would you come back next Sabbath and teach us these things too? And the next Sabbath, nearly the whole city assembled to hear the word of the Lord. How many think that's kind of cool? The whole city showed up. And it says, but when the Jews saw the crowd, they were filled with what? Oh, because they weren't coming to the synagogue to listen to Moses. They were coming to the synagogue to listen about who?
Jesus.
Listen about Jesus. They were filled with jealousy, and they began contradicting the things spoken by Paul. They began arguing with him in public, contradicting what he's saying. And they were what? They were actually blaspheming. And Paul and Barnabas spoke out boldly and said, it was what? Necessary that the word of God be spoken to you first. Since you repudiate it and judge yourselves unworthy of eternal life, behold, we are turning to the whom? To the Gentiles. And this is when the message started going out to the Gentiles. This is the turning point that I'm giving you. Just a little bit of church history. This is when the message started to turn to a new audience. When we find them 3 chapters later in Acts chapter 16, Paul is saying, from there we went to Philippi, which is the leading city in the district of Macedonia, a Roman colony. So is this a Hebrew colony or a Gentile colony?
Gentile.
This is a Gentile colony, and we were staying in that city for, what does it say?
Some days.
Some days. Now, I'm going to give you some history now that you may not be aware of. If you were raised in a very traditional Christian home, this is, once again, I've said this about 4 times during this series, I just want to encourage you to listen to what I'm about to say open-mindedly. It may be a little different than what you've heard in the past, but just hear me all the way out. Now, what kind of a colony was this? Hebrew or Gentile?
Gentile.
Okay, so here we have Paul and Barnabas in a Gentile land. It says on the what? The Sabbath day, we went outside the gate to a what?
Riverside.
A riverside where we were supposing that there would be a place of what?
Prayer.
Now notice, are they doing this for evangelistic reasons? If they were going to continue doing evangelism, where would they have stayed? In the city. But what they're there for many, many days. What day rolls around?
Sabbath.
The Sabbath. Now, they're trying to reach Gentiles. Are you with me? But still, Paul and Barnabas, when the Sabbath comes along, they notice what they do. They seek out a place where they've heard there might be some people what?
Prayer.
They're seeking out a place for prayer. It says, they were seeking out a place of prayer. I'm submitting to you this afternoon that if they were going to continue doing evangelism, they could have just stayed in the town. When the Sabbath came along, they began seeking for a place of prayer. And notice why. The rest of that verse is from Hebrews. It's a typo. You don't need to pay attention to it. We'll cover it before we're done. It shouldn't be there. The verse ends with prayer, that word prayer. So you can cross out the rest. That's not in Acts. But hear me out. They're there doing evangelism in a Gentile city. The Sabbath rolls around and they pull away from their evangelism and they seek out a place where they can pray. What does that say to you? Even though they've left the Jews, for personal reasons, did Paul and Barnabas still, throughout the rest of their life, continue celebrating God on the Sabbath? Were they, was Paul and Barnabas Sabbath keepers through the rest of their life?
Yes.
Yeah. Look at this. Matter of fact, one of the churches in Colossia, and if you're going to understand this, let me give you some background. Early apostolic Gnosticism. We talked about Gnosticism a little bit in this, but this is early apostolic Gnosticism. This is the early days of it. One of the beliefs, remember I told you, of Gnostics is that they believed all matter was evil. How many remember me telling you that? In other words, the body is evil, but the soul, that is holy. And the way you liberate the soul is you afflict the body. This idea has been kind of prevalent throughout Christian history. Not biblical, but prevalent. How many remember how in monasticism the monks would flail themselves and bring bodily harm to themselves? And they were doing it to try to liberate their soul. The ill treatment of the body to try to liberate the soul. How many have heard of that happening in Christian history? Well, this is where it comes from. Now, these Gnostics were seeking to influence the Colossian church. Now, here's what you have to understand. In the Colossian church, even though these were Gentile believers, they also were celebrating the Sabbath. But they weren't doing it the Hebrew way. The way the Pharisees, well, let me repeat it this way. They weren't doing it the Pharisaical way. They were doing it the original Hebrew way, which means every day the Sabbath would come along, they'd remember how the Lord rested on the Sabbath at the cross. And what were they doing? If they were doing it the original Hebrew way, what were they doing?
Partying.
They were partying. They were eating the fat. They were drinking the sweet. They were celebrating. But when the Gnostics came in, is that ill treatment of the body?
No.
Depending on how hard you party, it could be. But let's be honest for a moment. Is that depriving the body? Or did that involve sensory pleasure? And they began to look and say, why are you doing this every Sabbath? Don't you realize that you need to persecute the body? You need to fast on this day. Persecute the body so that your soul can be liberated. Watch what Paul says in regards to this. Therefore, listen up. No one is to act as your judge in regard to food or drink or in respect to a what?
Festival.
Or a what? A new moon or a what?
Sabbath.
Don't let them judge you for this. Don't let them keep defrauding you of your prize by delighting in what?
Self-abasement.
In what? Talk to me. Self-abasement. This is going to be important. The worship of what? This is not Judaism. This is Gnosticism. How many can see that? It was the Gnostics that worshipped angels. How many can see that tonight? Let me see your hands. So it says the worship of angels. It said taking his stand on visions that he has seen. Remember that secret knowledge that they all claim to have? Visions he has seen. Inflated without cause by his fleshly mind. Not holding fast to the head from which the entire body grows. And I think it's wild that Paul just messes with them. Because remember, the Gnostics believed the body was what? Evil. But now it starts talking about Christ and how Christ has a body and how he's the head of that body and how we're his body. How many can see him using the very language of the Gnostics just to kind of push the envelope a little bit? How many can see that in this passage? And then he goes on and he says, and he grows with the growth which is from God. If you've died with Christ to the elementary principles of this world, why, as if you were living in the world, do you submit yourself to such decrees as this? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, which all refer to things destined to perish with use. Though these are in accordance with the commandments and teachings of who?
Man.
Man. This is a man-made religion. It says these are matters which have, to be sure, an appearance. It looks good. The appearance of wisdom in self-made religion and self-abasement and severe treatment of the body, but they are of no value against fleshly indulgence. I'm giving you Acts 16 and Colossians 2 this evening to share with you the historical fact. And I don't want to draw any conclusions yet. I just want to put it before you. Were there those who post-Calvary, between the message to the Jews being rejected and AD 70, were there Christians who celebrated the Sabbath, not for creation, but celebrated the Sabbath in honor of the cross and Jesus resting in the Passion Weekend? Can you see that from those two passages? If you can see that tonight, let me see your hands. That is a historical reality that we cannot deny. Now, I want to talk about something else which also started to surface during that time. And I think you'll begin to understand why. There's a little bit of ambiguous history that nobody is agreed on. And everybody disagrees on what I'm about to share with you. And that's because the facts are not conclusive. It could be this way or it could be that way. Some of that ambiguous history is Revelation 1, verse 10. Where John says, I was in the Spirit on the what? The Lord's Day. Let me just be very clear here. There are still Christians today who see great intrinsic value in celebrating God on the Sabbath in honor of the crucifixion. There are also Christians today who see no intrinsic value in that. They honor the resurrection. And so they fellowship on which day? Sunday. Now, both camps will argue about what Revelation 1 is really talking about. These people who worship on the Hebrew Sabbath, they will say what Paul is talking about here, the Lord's Day, is the Sabbath, because that was the Lord's Day from the Old Testament of old. Others will say, no, the Lord's Day is the term for Sunday, not Saturday. It's the term for Sunday. How many have seen this debate? Am I making this up? How many have seen this debate within Christianity today? It exists. And I'm just going to tell you flat out, this is ambiguous. What does ambiguous mean?
Not clear.
It can be translated this way or it can be interpreted that way. There is no conclusive proof. Look at the next Didache. It was once again, the Apostles' Creed is what some people call it. This was the first set of beliefs Christians started to put down. And it was in the end of the first century, the beginning of the second century. It could be dated as late as 120 AD. In the Didache it says, "But every Lord's Day, gather yourself together." So can we at least say this? They were Christians calling the day they gathered together the Lord's Day.
Yes.
Talk to me.
Yep.
Yes. And notice that St. Ignatius of Antioch in AD 110, they said the Lord's, they referred to something, and it's hard to tell in this document. That's why it's ambiguous. What's in this document can be translated as him mentioning either the Lord's Day or the Lord's life. The document is corrupted. There's some damage to it. So they can't tell there whether the day is the Lord's day or the Lord's life. But you have three ambiguous mentions of the Lord's day in the first century. How many can see that so far tonight? I'm just giving you honest history. Now if we flip over to the back. Sorry, third page. Front of the third page. This is undisputed history. 50 years later, the middle of the second century, in about the 150s, we find the apocryphal Gospel of Peter. And this document uses the Lord's Day as the name for the when? The first day of the week. The day of Jesus what? Resurrection. So we have within 50 years some pretty definitive evidence that the term the Lord's Day was not being used for the Hebrew Sabbath. It was the new term for what?
Sunday.
Celebrating what day?
Sunday.
And what historical event were they celebrating on that day?
The resurrection.
The resurrection. Okay, follow with me. The Acts of Peter, which is another document in the middle of the second century, or the latter half of the second century. It talks about the Lord's Day as the next day after the what?
The Sabbath.
The Sabbath. I've given you other examples here. You have them from AD 100, AD 107, 145, 154, 178, 180, 200, 280, and 324. You have all of these referring to Sunday as either the 8th day, or the first day, or the Lord's Day. A lot of these sources repudiated the Sabbath keeping because they called it Judaizing. Now, I want you to notice this as well. A lot of what motivated them to pick a different day other than the Hebrew Sabbath was not some command by Jesus. I want to make that very clear. Because did Paul continue to keep the Sabbath?
Yes.
Yes.
Did the Colossians continue to keep the Sabbath?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It wasn't some command. Here's what happened. The Jews continued to become more and more and more militant. They continued to persecute the Christians and to provoke the Romans. Now, if you're a Christian living in this time and they're persecuting you and they're provoking the kingdom that you're living under, and the kingdom is associating you with them, what are you going to want to do real quick?
Distance.
You're going to put some distance. You're going to want to start disassociating with the Jews. Well, okay, fine, they're ticking you off, but we're not part of them. How many can see just where at least their motive was? How many can at least see that? And so they began to celebrate in Christianity. The majority of Christians during that time began to honor Jesus or celebrate Jesus on their Lord's Day, is what they called it. And it was in honor of the resurrection. Now, 2 points. Did they have a direct command to do this?
No.
But can we see why they would do it?
Yes.
How many can see why they would do it?
Yep.
You can see it. You can understand where they're coming from. Now, as we continue, then you come down to the 4th century. And this is where things get really ugly. You come down to the 4th century, and you have in March 3rd, AD 321, the Edict of Constantine. Constantine decreed that Sunday, Des Soles, will be observed as the Roman day of rest. This is what his decree stated. On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and the people residing in the cities do what?
Rest.
Let all the workshops be what?
Closed.
In the country, however, persons engaged in agriculture may freely and lawfully continue their pursuits, because it often happens that another day is not suitable for grain sowing or vine planting. lest by neglecting the proper moment for such operations, the bounty of heaven should be lost. What day became the, by law, day of Christian worship?
Sunday.
Sunday.
How many would like somebody to tell you what day you have to worship on? How many would like that? How many think this is a bad thing that have started to become legislated in law what day you're going to worship on? How many think that's a bad thing? Yeah. It's actually in direct contradiction to what Paul said. Now, Paul lived in that time period. Was Paul a contemporary of John's in Revelation 1?
Yep.
Yep.
Paul lived in that time period. And this was Paul's counsel on the matter. Will you turn there with me? Romans 14. Who are you to judge someone else's servant? To their own master they stand or fall. And they will stand, for the Lord is able to make them stand. Some consider one day more sacred than another. During this time of transition, wanting to distance themselves from Jews, did you see some people that remained keeping the Sabbath? How many saw that? How many saw that? Let me see your hands. But did you see how the Lord's Day started to surface as well? How many saw that this afternoon? What Paul's counsel to us is that some consider one day more sacred than another. Others consider every day what? Alike. His counsel was this: everyone should be fully convinced in their own what? Mind. Those who regard one day as special do so to the who?
Lord.
You then, why do you judge? Why do you judge your brother or your sister based on what day they worship on? Why do you treat your brother or sister with contempt? We will all stand before God's judgment seat. We will all give an account of ourselves to what?
God.
Irregardless of what Paul taught, Christianity has been plagued with those on both sides of this issue trying to villainize the other side. I have watched those who feel like Sunday is the day they should be celebrating. I have watched them villainize those who keep the Hebrew Sabbath as being legalists and old covenants. Have anybody ever witnessed that or seen that? I have watched those who keep the Hebrew Old Testament Sabbath. I have watched them put down Sunday keepers as if they're not as good a Christian as them, as they're an inferior Christian to them. How many have ever seen that happen? I'm just asking you to be honest. It's exclusive holiness. It's time to call that the dogs of judgment off. Call it off. Paul gives us very clear counsel. Who are you to judge another man's servant? Are you hearing me? That person is God's servant. If you agree with that, say yes.
Yes.
And you're not to dictate whether they're a good servant or a bad servant. You need to figure out which day you consider to be what is more consistent with what you believe about Jesus, and give other people the freedom to figure it out themselves without villainizing them for what they decide.
Yes.
Amen.
Thank you. Okay, I was hoping I wasn't going to get burned for that one. It's not to be something we evaluate someone's Christian walk by. Did you catch that from Paul's language? Jesus actually taught us in John 13:35, by this, everyone will know that you're my disciples if you what?
Love.
By this, everyone will know that you're my disciples by what day you go to church on. Is that what it says? It says, by this, everyone will know that you're my disciples, that you have what?
Love.
Love for one another. Flip over on the back. Now, I'm going to confess something to you this evening. I am actually part of the minority here. And I'm going to tell you why I am before we're done. I'm going to give you some reasons why others are first. I actually, myself, find greater resonance with the seventh-day Sabbath than I do first-day observance. And I'll tell you why. Now, do I look down on people who feel the opposite as me? Do I look down on them?
No.
No.
No. Do I judge them?
No.
No.
Do I think I'm a better Christian than them?
No.
No, not at all. It just resonates with me. It makes sense to me. And let me give you some reasons. Exodus 20, verse 12. Look at this. It says, I gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between me and them to show that it was what? Are you with me on the back page? We flipped over the page. It says, I gave them my what? Did I lose you? We're on handout number 3. We're on the back at the top. I gave them my what?
Sabbath.
Sabbaths to be a what?
Sign.
Sign between me and them, and to show them that it was what? I, the Lord, who made them what?
Holy.
So in the Old Testament, in Ezekiel, what reminded them that it was God who made them holy was the Sabbath. I find resonance in this for me. Because here's my thoughts on this. How do you know, once again, how much your house is worth? Do you remember what we said? How do you know that? What someone's willing to pay for it, all right? How do you know how much your car is worth? Ditto, thank you. How do you know how much a work of art is worth? Ditto, that's right. It's how much someone is willing to pay for it. When Jesus died for me on the cross, how much was he willing to give for me? How much was he willing to give up for me? Yes. Can you measure the worth of God? How many were here the night where we discussed this? Can you measure the worth of God?
No.
So you would have to say his worth is unmeasurable. How many would agree with that? His worth is unmeasurable. And what was God willing to give up for you?
Everything.
Everything. You know what that says God says about you? You are invaluable. It's he who makes me special. It's not stuff that I've accomplished that makes me special. It's not stuff that I do or don't do that makes me special. It's not stuff that I believe or don't believe that makes me special. What gives me value is that the God of this universe thinks I have immeasurable worth, and he was willing to prove it. How many are thankful for that tonight? How many think, wow, yes. And so for me, when I rest on the Sabbath, do you know what it reminds me of? Of how my God also rested in the tomb on that Sabbath, from finishing his work for me on the cross and giving me infinite worth. The Sabbath is a sign to me that it's God and what he says about me on the cross that makes me holy and valuable and worth something. How many think there's beauty in just that thought? So the Sabbath for me reminds me of that. Look at it in Luke 4. Some people keep the Sabbath just because they want to follow. And I got to be very careful here. I am not saying that if you go to church on Sunday, you're not following Jesus. Did you hear me say that? Did you hear me say that?
Yeah.
But there are some people who've been so hurt by the Christian religion that they just need to follow Jesus in a way that's very different than traditional Christianity. How many can sympathize with that? And so I know some people who celebrate the Sabbath because of Luke 4:16. It says he, Jesus, went to where?
Nazareth.
Where he had been what?
Brought up.
And on the what?
Sabbath.
Sabbath day, he went into the synagogue, as was his what?
Sabbath.
They celebrate the Sabbath. They honor the Sabbath because they feel like that's what Jesus did. And they want to follow what Jesus did. And therefore, they've been burnt by that. They just have to separate it. And they just honor Jesus on that day because that's what they're following Jesus' example. Jesus never went to, this is their reasoning, Jesus never went to church on Sunday. Therefore, I need to do what Jesus did. And that's for them how they separate their following Jesus from the abuse they've experienced with Christians. How many can be sympathetic towards that? How many can see that? Again, in Romans 4, verse 5, some people look at it this way. To the one who does not what? Work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted as what?
Righteous.
So they say salvation is not by works, but by what? I know some people who celebrate the Sabbath, they stop working every seventh day, and they use that as a reminder that just as they stopped physically working this day, they are to remember that they are to actually cease working spiritually every day and rest in the finished work of Jesus on the cross. How many can see how the Sabbath for them is not legalism, it is not old covenant. The Sabbath for them is a reminder of the gospel principle of by faith and no works. How many can see that? So we don't want to villainize that. We don't want to villainize either side. In John 19:30, this is another reason. When he had received the drink, he said, "It is" what?
Finished.
It is finished. So some people feel like it's this. When the sixth day comes along, which is Friday, when the sixth day comes along, in the evening they wrap up their work. And that's for them a celebration of how Jesus on that same day 2,000 years ago was saying, "It is finished." And then they rest for the next 24 hours till the following evening to mimic how Jesus rested in the tomb. And then on Sunday, just as Jesus resurrected, they resurrect too and go back to work. For them, it's a way of reenacting the crucifixion every weekend. How many can see that this evening? For them, it's a way of remembering this Jesus that we're serving. Let me share with you why I am a Sabbatarian, why I worship on Sabbath. In Hebrews, and this is my largest reason in Hebrews. For me personally, I think this passage speaks volumes. I'm holding you a little longer tonight, and please forgive me. It's going to take me a few minutes to explain Hebrews. But let me just say this. I was always told in all my public speaking classes that I failed. I was always told, if you say you're going to end it sometime, you really need to end at that period, because if you hold people too long, they really won't come back the next night to your meetings. I got nothing to lose. So I'm just going to share with you my heart tonight. Is that okay?
Yes.
It says in Hebrews, and you have to understand the purpose of the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews is written to Jewish Christians. Jews who had left their Judaism and come to Christianity. They were followers of Jesus. They were Messianic Jews, is what we call them nowadays. But you have to understand, they were used to going to the temple every Sabbath, or a big synagogue every Sabbath, with all this liturgy and all this symbolism and all this beauty. And now, to become a Christian and follow Jesus, do you know what that looked like? 15 to 20 people meeting in some dude's house every weekend. How many can see the difference in that? How many would think, oh man, we're losing? How many would feel like you're losing something if your church burnt down to the ground and you started worshiping in churches every weekend? How many would feel, or in houses every weekend? How many would feel like you've lost something? Let me see your hands. How many would feel like you've lost? How many would be like, forget that? I would love to have church every weekend, just 15 or 20 of us in-house churches. How many would think that'd be kind of an advantage? Sell all the property, just give the money to the poor, and let's just start meeting in people's houses. How many think that'd be, any votes for that? Any votes? A few. Yes, we got a mixture of opinion. Let me encourage you to follow Paul's counsel. Let each be fully convinced in their own mind. All right? But notice, here were these Hebrews struggling with this. They were transitioning from big synagogues to little homes. And there was still persecution. And they were losing faith. They were losing heart. And they were beginning to reason, no, you know what? You know what? I remember in Deuteronomy. Look in your gray section. I remember in Deuteronomy. Remember what God said. God said, but you, through Joshua, or through Moses, sorry, but you will cross the Jordan and settle in the land the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. And He will give you what?
Rest.
Rest from all your what? Enemies. So that you will live in safety. They're saying, listen, Jesus hasn't given us this rest. Joshua did. We need to go back to Judaism. How many can see their headspace right now? How many of you can understand that? Joshua gave us rest when He brought us into the land of Canaan. This Jesus guy, we've been following the wrong one, the wrong Messiah. Let's go back. That's why we don't know who the author of Hebrews was. Look at it with me, Hebrews 3, 12 through 16. The author of Hebrews writes, it's there in your gray section. See to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. Who were they who heard and rebelled? Were they not all those that Moses led out of Egypt? He reminds them of how they also wanted to turn in what direction? Talk to me. In what direction? Those who had been pulled out of Egypt, the slaves, what did they want to do all the way along to Canaan? What did they want to do?
Go back.
Go back. What are these Hebrews now wanting to do?
Go back.
Go back. And they're saying, listen, Jesus didn't, we don't get it. Jesus, no, Joshua gave us rest. So they're turning back. They're in danger of repeating history again. And so he writes in Hebrews 4:8, follow with me in the white section now. If Joshua had given them rest, God would not have later spoken about another day. Now watch his logic. Hebrews 4:6-7. Those who formerly had the good news proclaimed to them, they did not go in because of their disobedience. Those who were traveling through the wilderness out of Egypt. It says, God again set a certain day, calling it today. This he did when a long time later he spoke through who?
David.
Spoke through who?
David.
David, as in the passage already quoted, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Let me make it very simple for you. These Jews were thinking, no, Joshua gave us rest. We need to go back to that. And Paul, or the author of Hebrews, is saying, listen, if Joshua had given you rest, why is David still calling for them to enter into rest? They had come into Canaan. How many can see that? They had come into Canaan, but had they still entered into the rest that God had wanted them to experience with him? The spiritual rest. Had they still done that?
No.
No, that's why David, who's the king now, years later, is still calling them. What Paul is saying is, listen, you're going back to Joshua. Dude, none of those guys, even though they went into Canaan, they never experienced the rest. You're thinking that you're going back to something, but they never accomplished it. That's why it says in Hebrews 4:14, therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still what? Still stands. Let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. For we also have had the good news proclaimed to, what does it say? Us, just as they did. But the message that they heard was of no, what does it say? Value to them. Because they did not share the faith of those who had obeyed. Now we who have believed, we enter that rest. The rest isn't about Canaan. It's not about Joshua. It's what Jesus came to give us. How many would agree with that tonight? That's the rest. And we who believe, we're the ones who enter that rest. And you got to put yourself in their sandals for a minute. They're Jewish people turning away from Jesus and wanting to go back. It says, we've entered into that rest. And I declared it just as God has said. So I declared an oath in my anger. They never will enter my rest. Just as they didn't, you have. Don't turn back to what they have. It says, and yet and yet his work has been what? Finished since when? The creation of the world and I love Paul, the author of Hebrews here. I love this because he could get away with stuff I couldn't. You see, this is before there were chapters and verses, and all he had to say was, it says somewhere. Now, if I'm going to tell you the Bible says something, I got to give you a chapter and verse. How many think that's just unfair? Be honest. How many wish you'd been back in this day where you could just say it says somewhere in that scroll over there? How many think that'd be a little easier? Yeah. But he said, it says somewhere he has spoken about the what?
Seventh day.
The author of Hebrews is using the Sabbath to prove that they should not abandon Jesus. He's saying the seventh day on these words, on the seventh day, God what? Rested from all his what?
Word.
Think about what Jesus said. Matthew 25:34. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, come you who are blessed of my Father, enter the kingdom which was prepared for you from when?
The foundation of the world.
Think of what Paul said in Ephesians, just as he chose us in him. When?
Before the foundation of the world.
Revelation 13:8. John calls Jesus the Lamb slain. From when?
Foundation of the world.
Peter talks about it, says he was foreknown before when?
Foundation.
But has appeared in these last days for the sake of you. What he's doing is he's calling the Sabbath to their attention. And he's saying, you Jewish believers, even in your Sabbath, do you not believe that the reason God rested in the very beginning was because he was what? Because he was what? Finished. Why would God rest? I have to explain this since you didn't come back quickly. Either you're not answering me or you don't understand what I'm saying. So let me stop and pause. How many wish they would have answered now? Let me stop and pause. Why would God rest? He doesn't grow tired. He doesn't grow weary. You and I rest when we get tired, whether the job's done or not. If God doesn't get tired, when would He rest? Let me explain it again. When would He rest? If He doesn't get tired, when would He rest? When He's done, when the job's finished, when it's completed. He's saying, Paul is saying, sorry, the author of Hebrews is here saying, listen, He finished the work. And it's proven. That's what your whole Sabbath points towards, is that it was finished. But it wasn't just rocks and birds and trees and all this other stuff. What He finished was a kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. How many can see that tonight? What He finished for you was saying that even if they should rebel against me, I will come and die for them. He's the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. How many can see that tonight? And not just that, we have been chosen to be a part of that kingdom. From when? He's imploring them, do not turn away from Jesus. Even your own Sabbath points to a time, points to a finished work where God rested. And all God's asking you to do is rest in it. That's why in Hebrews 4, 6 through 11, notice what it says, therefore, since it still remains for some to enter that rest, don't deceive yourself that Joshua brought them into that. David was still calling for it, and Jesus showed up calling us to it. Since there still remains for some to enter that rest, and since those who had formerly had the gospel news proclaimed to them did not go in, because of their what? There remains then a, what does he call it? A Sabbath rest for the people of God. And he's not talking about the Saturday one. He's talking about the eternal one. Jesus said, come unto me, and you will find what? Rest for your what? Souls. Today's English version says, as it is, however, there remains for God's people a rest like God's resting on the seventh day. For those who enter God's rest also rest from their own what? Word. Just as God did from His. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. The only thing I want you to get from this is this very clearly. They were in danger of abandoning Jesus and going back. How many can see that tonight? One of their reasons was Joshua gave them rest, not Jesus. Let's go back home. Let's go back to the synagogue. Paul says, listen, Joshua didn't give them rest. David is still calling for them to enter in. How do you explain that if Joshua gave it to them? And not just that, even your own Sabbath points to a work that's been finished. A much larger work that Jesus actually came and perfected for you. Jesus is the one in whom we have. Just at your weekly Sabbath is pointing forward to that spiritual Sabbath that all of us have in Jesus. How many would agree? How many can see what I'm saying tonight? It points forward to what it's an embodiment. It's a symbol of a finished work, of resting in a finished work. It's symbolic of what Jesus actually came to give. And so I'm submitting to you this evening the reason I'm a Sabbath-keeping, a Sabbatarian. That's the label they give me. It's because on a weekly basis it reminds me of what Jesus came to give me. And that's rest. So can I ask those of you in the room who see value and say, there's nothing wrong with celebrating the resurrection. If you agree with that, say yes. Yes. There's nothing wrong with celebrating the resurrection. And those of you who feel passionate about celebrating the resurrection on Sunday morning, can I just ask of you a favor? Would you stop accusing me as a Sabbatarian as being a legalist? Can you do that? Can you do that? And can you see that there might be some gospel reasons for why I'm doing what I'm doing? Can you see that? And can you just understand that I'm just as much a Christian as you are? Actually, I'm not. Slip of the tongue. I love Jesus just as much as you do. And I'm committed to serving him just as much as you are. We just have two different days within Christian history that some have always seen value in. Even some of the Anabaptists. How many remember the Anabaptists? There was a big group of the Anabaptists that actually celebrated the Sabbath instead of Sunday. Sabbath and Sunday has always been a point of contest within Christian history. These are the reasons why I'm a Sabbatarian. Is there anyone here tonight that you've never even heard of the Sabbath before, and this is your first introduction to it, your first presentation on it? Anybody here? No. See, like I said, it's a long-standing debate. There's a lot of history around it. Both camps love Jesus. Am I right?
Yes.
Both camps are committed to following Jesus. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes. And for some people, they see actually greater value in the Sabbath for the reasons I've mentioned tonight. And that's the day they choose to worship on. My counsel to all of us is the same as Paul's. I will say this, something that concerns me is this idea that you can just pick any day. God just wants one day in 7. It doesn't matter which day. That concerns me a bit, because I think if you're going to celebrate a day, there should be some historical significance behind the day. How many would agree with that? If you're going to celebrate Sunday, fine. Do that, because is there some history behind it? Is there an event behind it? Is there an event behind it?
Yes.
What event is that?
Resurrection.
The resurrection. If you're going to celebrate Sabbath, fine, celebrate that. Because is there some history behind it?
Yes.
Because Jesus honored the Sabbath in the crucifixion, did he not? In the Passion Weekend. Did he do that?
Yes.
Yes. And so just have some history to back up. Don't pick Tuesday at 3:30 to have your Sabbath on. Are you hearing what I'm saying? To me, that's just willy-nilly. Have some type of history you're celebrating on that day, and just trust that we're not to judge each other. One day considers one day more sacred than another. Paul said, let each person be fully convinced in his own mind. Now, for some of you, I offer it to you this way. If you need to follow Jesus in a way that is different than what has hurt you, I want to encourage you to take a serious look at the biblical Sabbath, at the Bible Sabbath. I wanted you to take a look at it because you can follow Jesus in a way that, let me say it this way, you can celebrate him still on a day that doesn't have to bring back all of those old memories. Doesn't have to bring back all that pain. And it's just as acceptable within the community of Jesus followers to celebrate him on Sabbath as Sunday. So I offer you Sabbath this evening as a benefit. There's an intrinsic value to it, and I offer that to you this evening. Let's pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for the gift of the Sabbath, but also thank you most importantly, above all else, thank you for the cross and how someone chooses to celebrate that cross, your death for us. Father, we're all still growing. I'm just thankful we're celebrating the cross. That's the good news. And that's where we're going to close this series, Lord. As we just take one more moment to look at what I think is the most misunderstood event in all of human history. The moment where God chose to abandon himself rather than abandon us. God, give us wisdom as we take one more look at you before we end this series. In your precious name we pray all this. Amen. God bless you guys.